This is a complete beginner guide. This will apply to any dirt bikes. It doesn't matter which brand dirt bike you have. We're talking about setups, and I also explain it to you why is that setup so important, so that way you understand why we are doing what we are going to do. Before we start, today's video powered by Urmasi. We design and manufacture dirt bike parts like the 720 SBC or flexible brake pedals and more. Built by riders who believe some things can be done better. Learn more on our website. We're mainly talking about things which is free. It doesn't cost you any money to set up your bike, except 2 items, which is still cost effective. And out of 2, I really strict down to 1 item, which is you must do when you buy your new dirt bike, and you gotta have that change. So the first item is quite complex. And you also heard a lot about it, how important it is. No wonder why, but most of the time people are ignoring it, including myself. In my early riding days, I didn't care at all, but I was young and my body could take those crashes no problem. But as I'm getting older, I rather not crash if I don't need to. So the first item on the list is the suspension. Yeah, I know. You heard a lot about it, like I said before. When you look at your book, it will tell you soft, medium, and like hard settings. And whatever that number is, it's specific to your book. Let's say normally like between 13 to 15. You want to set up the soft settings on your bike, front and rear. But let's just start with the front, and then we're going to go to the rear, because the rear is extremely complicated. The front, you're setting it up. If it says the soft setting 13, you can set up the compression and rebound to 13. And the compression, you can go down 1 click, which is 12. The reason for that, because the rebound still helps you with the compression as well. And you're not riding as nearly as fast as those guys who made these settings in this book, because you are a beginner and you want to have the soft following feeling on the track. So you want to have the front and rear equally following the track according the way you are riding with your bike. The reason why this is so important, because if you're turning and the bike it doesn't follow the trail, then the front gets washed out and you obviously crash. So item number 1 is set up the front suspension very, very soft. Also, there is a height adjustments, which is you can do on your triple clamp. You have a basic setup, which is normally on KTM like the third lines, I believe, and you can manipulate that according to the way you ride and the type of riding you are doing. Meaning by, if you're riding on a desert, like you're going normally fast, then you wanna have the front fork moved down on the triple clamp. That way the bike becomes stable on high speed. But you also lose cornerability by doing that. But since you're mainly going very fast and the turns are not as sharp, it doesn't really matter for you. And then there is those guys who riding on the trails. A lot of turns, a lot of change directions. I think that's the way the bike normally is set up. So I don't recommend to do any changes on the front fork when you're doing so slow technical riding, because the bike will turn quite well, especially if you have a Yamaha dirt bike. That's the way that these bikes are turned. It's amazing. Just leave the fork the way it is. You don't really need to change the fork height in that situation. The other important thing is bleed your fork. There is a little air screw on the top of the front fork. You want to take that out frequently and let the air comes out. Even if you don't hear it, just do it. It doesn't matter if you think there is anything comes out or not. It's recommended to do that because it will change the front fork capabilities. So bleed your front fork, very important. Check your torque specs on the front triple clamp, especially on the lower one, because that can affect the way the suspension compress and rebound. It could kind of stuck in that area. It won't move as freely. Also, you're gonna have the oil wear down quicker inside the suspension because the friction is just more than it's supposed to be. The dealers not always care about that. They care about more to sell you something and they can make money on it than setting up the bike the right way. So do that, very important. I don't see why you need to buy a stabilizer on the beginning if you ride on the desert on high speed, because there is a little trick what pro MX riders does, like Jet and Hunter Lawrence, which is tightening the triple clamp down more. So the steering stem, there's a big bolt on it. You can tighten it down more and the steering feel becomes kind of not as free to move. And that's acting like a stabilizer in a way when you're doing high-speed riding, if you are doing that. If you're doing slow trail riding, you don't want to do this. So that's pretty much cover the front fork. The rear, it's there is much more to it. Let's start with the sag. You want to have the sag between 30 and 40 millimeter. The 30 millimeter, if you're doing hard pack riding, if you're doing like intermediate, you can do 35. If you do sand riding, you want to do 40. Why? Why is this so important? Because you want to have the best traction on your bike and also the lightest steering feel on the front as possible. So when you're doing sand riding, you want to have the sag on 40 millimeter because the front needs to be light so you're not crashing because the front tire getting into some of the ruts. So the front remains light. That way it can stay on top of the surface and you can corner and you can maneuver it better on the sand, but not on the hard packed dirt. On the hard packed dirt, you want to have 30 millimeter. The best all around setup is the 35 millimeter. That gets you safely everywhere in pretty much every condition. Now, all of my bikes are set up at 40 mil because I can manipulate that with my weight. If I go high speed, I'm just gonna sitting on the back side, so that way the front become very, very light. And if I go in a technical trails, which has a lot of turns, I'm just gonna sitting up further a little bit more, like putting more weight to the front. So the 40 mil setup, it actually helps me to have a more versatile bike because I can compensate that with my weight. This is just, for my riding skill. It's not necessarily applies to you. You really want to have the sag set up to that riding condition, what you've been playing with or you're going to riding on. The suspension setup on the rear applies the same way as it is on the front. So if the book says 13 to 15, the 13 is the soft setup, the suspension for 13, and the compression going to 12. You can leave the rebound the way the book says it. The next settings is very, very important. Handlebar. You do not want the handlebar moving away from you or move it closer to you. Also, the handlebar height is very, very important. Start with, if you're moving the handlebar away from you or move it closer to you, you will experience arm pump. Especially if you're a beginner rider, you do not want to have that. You want to have the handlebar set up just right when you can hold the handlebar properly, and very important, the elbow up. The handlebar needs to be in line with the suspension. That's how it gets designed. That's how pro racers, that's how everybody, including myself, recommended all of my bikes are set up like that. That way I do not experience arm pump. And I have another trick with my 720 SPC to reduce arm pump and vibration, but that's not part of the topic. This is just a little sidetrack. Handlebar controls the clutch and the brake. You want to have when you are standing on the bike, you want to have that straight feeling to be able to reach your brake and clutch. You don't want to have it like this. You don't want to have it like that. You want to have that line following all the way through your hand, all the way down to reach the clutch and the brake control. I do recommend to take the twist throttle apart and grease it a little bit. Grease the handlebar, grease everything over there, because you don't want to have the throttle being sticky. You want to have the throttle soft, smooth all the time. When you getting your bike and you're just standing next to it and then you start twisting it, it will feel soft. But when you actually taking off in third gear and the force pulls you back because your bike is accelerating, that's the time when you're holding yourself on the bike harder, and that's when you're forcing the twist throttle onto the handlebar very strong, and that's the time when the throttle becomes sticky and you may ending up pulling the throttle more than otherwise you would, because you just cannot let it go quick enough because it sticks. So just grease the throttle, very important to have the soft feeling when it needed most. And that's not when you're taking it off from the showroom floor and you feel it works good and you just leave it the way it is. The next item is the rear axle. You don't want to have the rear axle too much front, because that's create a feeling when the bike turns very well, but also it turns too much. It feels like you have a weight way up high and you're just leaning and you crash, and then you cannot save it. You want to have the front wheel move back further as possible, not like crazy high. I will show you how it's supposed to be to have it right, but you want to have the wheel moved back. That way you still have a good cornerability and you also have a good traction. Plus you also have a very, very good stable bike on high speed. The rear brake and the shifter needs to set up properly. The shifter, you cannot have it too low, you cannot have it too high. You have to find that sweet spot, whatever boots you have. It really depends on your boots, because if you're using MX boots, then you don't need to raise it up as high. If you're using enduro boots, that's more goofier, then you may want to raise it up higher. But generally, normally they're raising it up one slot. That's how normally we are doing it, just moving it one slot up, and that will take care of it. On the brake, you don't want to have a quick braking. You want to have a play on your braking. If you have a KTM and then you have the brake up set up, works kind of instantly. It doesn't have a lot of play. If you're riding on uphill, downhill, you will experience the rotor gets too hot and expand just enough to have the rear brake sticky, and it happened with me. You ending up having no brake on the rear because it's just constantly braking the rear wheel. You do not want to have that. You want to have plenty of play. And when you're standing, you want to make sure the brake is not close to your boots. You want to have it away from it. And when it comes to standing on the bike, you do not want to stand on the bike with the mid side of your feet. You don't want to stand on your back over here. You want to stand on your back over here. And then that way you can have a better traction on the rear wheel. Very important. And then every time when you want to hit the brake, you're moving your feet. And these are the things what I was just told you about feet positions. It only makes sense if you spend enough time on your bike. Otherwise, you just don't want to do that. You just want to have your feet the way you feel like it's right, and it's not necessarily matching the way it's supposed to be. When you go up riding and your body tells you to let's go one more lap and you said no, these are the times when actually hurting your ride abilities, because more time you spend each time of your riding, that's what makes you a better rider. If you go out and ride once a week and you always ride 30 minutes, that doesn't really make you a better rider. If you go out and you ride not 30 minutes, but 1 hour, that makes you a better rider. And we are talking about two items in this section, which is cost you money, but you must have one of them out of the two. This is the item. If you don't change anything on your bike, but this one item you have to order to ride safely and ride good on whatever trail you are on or you are going to be on. And this item is the tire. You do want to change the tire because the OEM tire is not meant to. There is a very rare occasion when the OEM tire is actually working to your riding style, and then that doesn't mean the way you ride. It actually means the trail you are riding on. If it's rocky, you want to have a soft tire. If it's sand, you want to have like a pedal tire. Whatever trails you are going to riding on, you want to have the tires set up accordingly. On the front, there is so many options to have excellent, manageable tractions. Each of my bikes has a different front tire. On my KTM, I have a Michelin tire up front, which is very, very good with tractions. That's something when I discovered not too long ago. Before, I always was on Dunlop, and I went with Dunlop because I like the brand. But unfortunately, Michelin makes a better tire than the Dunlop far as my personal reference goes on the front. So that means you don't really want to have a brand loyalty on these tire setups. You just want to have the best one, period. And you read reviews. There's a lot of them out there. They're testing it. You want to have like at least 2 reviews, not just one. And if both of them said something close to it, then you can choose whatever there is. And the second cost item is the seat cover. You may think that's a silly thing. Why am I want to replace my seat cover? I'm just sitting on the bike, and if it's comfortable for me, then why the hell I want to change it? When you taking off or when you're braking hard, then the seat lets you, the OEM seat lets you to move your weight back and forth. You see something what scares you, and all of a sudden you're hitting the brake. That moves your weight forward because you're sliding on the seat cover. And what that does, it's actually driving the front more deeper into that rut. That guides you into the wrong direction and you're ending up crashing. If you do not move your weight forward in the same situation, you have your weight back, then the front going to be light and it won't stays in the rut. You can take the front out of the rut. Hope that makes sense for you. The seat cover is very important because it keeps you in the same position. You're not gonna slide. And these are the setups what I recommend for the beginner riders, even for the advanced riders with the different click settings. But technically, everybody can benefit from these settings because it just makes your bike perform way better than otherwise would. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.